Nearly 800,000 people die by suicide globally every year. One death occurs by suicide every 40 seconds. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among emerging adults between the ages of 15 and 24 years. These are some of the headlines that appear every year on September 10th, World Suicide Prevention Day. Yet these statistics do not aptly cover the magnitude of the challenges faced, nor do they describe the feelings and thoughts of those experiencing suicidal ideation and of those who have lost someone because of suicide. Through this panel discussion, the Department of Psychology, St. Joseph's Evening College, aims to shed light on these experiences of suicide and suicide prevention by asking the question, what makes life worth living? Good evening, everyone. I'm Marianne Pais from the Department of Psychology. On behalf of the department, we welcome each of you to this panel discussion titled What Makes Life Worth Living? Experiences of Suicide Prevention. We are joined today by Ms. Jonaki Ghosh Thomas, Mr. Nivendra Uduman, and Ms. Rashi Thakran. Each of them have contributed to suicide prevention and have varying experiences relating to this topic, and I'm sure they will enrich our understanding about it. We are honored to have with us as well our principal, Dr. Paul Newman. Before we begin, we would like to remind our participants that during the course of the discussion, you are free to share your questions in the chat, and these will be posed at the end of the session. We also request you to, if you are a student, to change your to change your username to your register number so we can take attendance. Thank you. We now request our principal, Dr. Paul Newman, to deliver his insights. Apart from being our principal, he is a very prolific writer, researcher, and speaker. He's an observer and participant at the UN Human Rights Council, Geneva, Switzerland since 2012. He was a member of the fact-finding team on the state response after Cyclone Okai in southern Tamil Nadu and Kerala in December 2017. Sir has also worked with several special interest groups, including refugees, migrants, and even suicide bombers. We are very honored that you agreed to share your insights with us, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Marianne. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, a very good evening to all the participants in this webinar. So as Ms. Marianne has already pointed out, September 10th is the World Anti-Suicide Day, or the Day Against Suicide. So one of the most important aspects of life is to respect life itself. So in that sense, we see that people go to the extent of taking away something which they have not created. So when we are born, we are expected to live until we die a natural death. But suicide is something that we take away our own lives. So that is being utterly irresponsible. So when the Department of Psychology was thinking of organizing an awareness program for our students, I welcome the move by Dr. Rekha as well as Ms. Marianne that we should have such programs for the simple reason that we deal with about 1,500 youngsters in our college. So as one of the leading institutions, being the only autonomous evening college in India, accredited by the NAC and recognized by the UGC, so we are the ones who need to keep our students informed, because most of our students come from the marginalized backgrounds where these tendencies are far higher comparable to the others who lead quite a luxurious and decent life. So here, being a professor of history, when I look at suicide, two names comes to my mind as case studies. The first name that comes to my mind as a case study is that of Cleopatra, considered the most beautiful woman the world has ever seen. She committed suicide when she was only around 20 years old. She had a child. She was considered a mistress of Julius Caesar, and then later on Mark Antony. If you read the Egyptian history or the Roman classics, you will get to know of it. Even Mark Antony again committed suicide. My question is, what would have happened if they had not committed suicide? If they had not committed suicide, in the case of both Mark Antony as well as Cleopatra, they would have surrendered themselves to the Romans. What would the Romans have done to them later on? The Romans would have probably put these people in a prison, ill-treated them, and they would have lived for a few more years until dying of natural causes, or they would have given a punishment of death by the Romans. So it is here that why these people had to go to the extent of taking away their own lives. Is life so very miserable? Is there no alternative? See, these are the questions that come to our minds. Certainly, ending your life doesn't really solve the problem. After ending your life, are you completely liberated? What about the social stigma that is attached to the families you come from is the question. So today, Cleopatra is remembered for all the wrong reasons, the reason of committing suicide. Mark Antony is seen as a coward. At the same time, if these two people had surrendered, history would have changed to a certain extent. So when we look at the 20th century also, in the entire history of humanity, if you look at the worst people who have ever roamed on this planet, one of the top names would be that of Adolf Hitler. Hitler is supposed to have again committed suicide along with his mistress who became his wife on the last day of his life. That is what is said. So what if Hitler had lived? He would have probably been compelled to surrender to the Americans or to the Russians, the British and the French. What would have happened? He would have undergone a fair trial and he would have been condemned to prison. But taking away his life, what did he do? He proved himself to be one of the weakest men the world has ever seen, scared of death. He was not scared of anybody else. He was scared of death. He was scared of getting punished. But then there have been other great leaders who have withstood the test of time. For example, Napoleon is another great personality who comes to our mind. So Napoleon, though shamed, though lost very many battles, he surrendered, tried to escape. After the Battle of Waterloo, he escaped, in fact. He escaped because he had the urge to live. Then once again, he was imprisoned and he died of natural causes out of stomach cancer. So in that sense, when Marianne ma'am also spoke about my association with the suicide bombers, when I was doing my PhD doctoral thesis in Sri Lanka on the question of human rights, I came across a number of suicide bombers from the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. So there, the concept of suicide is totally different. The person who's committing suicide bombing is seen as a martyr, is seen as somebody carrying on the legacy of the right to self-determination, the fight for another, the fight for the rights of the others, fighting for the rights of the others. So in that sense, they put the whole discourse itself completely changes there. They don't want to. I have seen the fear in their eyes. You know, I have seen, but they are very committed people. But on the same, at the same time, they are people who are fearful of their own lives for the simple reason that life is something precious. Everybody is scared of giving up their life, but only the cowards are the ones who take up to suicides. So in that way, even the suicide bombers in whose eyes I have seen real fear. They know what they are doing is wrong, because along with them, they are also taking away the lives of others. A large number of them may be innocent people, because in today's world, suicide bombing is very popular among the terrorist groups. So here they feel that by becoming a suicide bomber, they become martyrs, which is not the case, because you're also killing a good number of innocents along with your own cells. So coming back to the topic of suicide, suicide is not the ultimate goal of life. You are becoming an escapist. You are shying away from your responsibility. You are running away from the reality. That is how I see this as, because the psychological trauma that your family members undergo if you become a victim of suicide, if you commit suicide, is enormous. Because I have seen the trauma of the families of the suicide bombers, the parents who undergo this trauma, the brothers and sisters of the person who has committed suicide undergoing the trauma. It is not just for a year or two. I have seen people who had committed suicide bombing 30 years back, their families suffering even to this day. So, in that sense, suicide is not an answer. It is a problem, because of late, the last 1 week, I have read about a few students committing suicide against the conducting of the NEET exams, especially in Tamil Nadu, because there is academic pressure to a great extent on our kids. But then, if you are unable to face it, suicide is not the answer for the question posed in life. I think I was given 5 to 10 minutes. I'm getting to the end of 10 minutes. So I wish the Department of Psychology a very, very happy and enriching experience through this webinar. I hope our students get greatly benefited by the wisdom that is going to be shared by the panelists. I would like to especially thank Dr. Rekha as well as Ms. Marianne Paz for initiating these sort of very, very important interactive sessions in the form of webinars with experts from the field who would enlighten our students. And then this intact as a boomerang effect, because our students can really educate their younger siblings or elder siblings and family members. So I wish both Dr. Rekha as well as Ms. Marianne all the very best for the continuation of this session. Along with that, I also thank the panelists for taking their time out from their busy schedules and trying to be with us to educate our students. Thank you, and a warm welcome to the panelists and our students.
Thank you so much, sir, despite your busy schedule, for spending this time for us, with us, and also for your support for this endeavor. And as always, it was certainly enlightening to hear your insights on this topic. I think what struck me was that there is so much complexity in relation to suicide, including the effect of suicide not only on the person, but on the families as well, as the larger context, as you mentioned, the course of history itself. Also, the context playing a role in how we interpret suicide itself, I think, was very clearly highlighted. And I think whether we're Cleopatra or Marianne from SJEC, we all have something to contribute to history. So as they say, a butterfly flapping its wings causes a typhoon. So I think that was something that I took away. So thank you so much, sir, for spending your time with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be there listening.
Sure. I think some people had raised their hands. So if sir is there towards the end, maybe you can put the questions you have in the chat and we can pose it at the end of the session.
Sure.
If that's okay with you, sir. Yeah. Thank you. We'll now begin with our first speaker. As mentioned earlier, the purpose of this panel discussion is to provide insight into the experiences of suicide and suicide prevention. We are joined by three eminent personalities who have contributed in varying ways to suicide awareness and prevention. Our first speaker is Ms. Jonaki Ghosh Thomas. Ms. Jonaki is a professional counselor, psychologist, career advisor, breath mindfulness coach, and QPR gatekeeper with experience spanning over 18 years. She is also a member of the American Psychologists Association, or APA. She is a published author, and her blog, Live in Light and Love, provides insight into the therapeutic process, mental health experiences, and ways of working through challenges. Her area of expertise is in relationships with the self and others, and she has worked with varying age groups, including children, adolescents, and adults. Her goal is to empower individuals and organizations to achieve their potential. Ma'am, we're so grateful that you've chosen to spend time with us today, and we're looking forward to what you have to share. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you for having me here. Good evening, Dr. Paul Newman, Dr. Rekha, Marianne, Rashi, Navendra, and everyone here. Hi. After that warm welcome that I have, I must say that, yes, suicide is a very I'm glad that Dr. Newman set the tone to the historical part of how suicide has been a part of our culture. Ever since humanity has been there, we have been dealing with death in some form or the other. But it's a tragedy. A death by suicide is a tragedy. And it affects mostly all the people who are left behind, not only families, communities, but the entire support system that has to handle people who have to take care, people who have to manage, who have to support, who have to manage the families after that. So I know Marianne shared some data also with you, right at the beginning. I was listening to her, but all the people who have joined now, I'll start with a few numbers. She shared that more than 700,000 people die due to suicide every year. And WHO's figure, if I'm to state that from May 2021, it says anything between that and 800,000 has been the number in the last year itself. And for young adults, suicide is the fourth leading cause of death, the others being accident, teenage pregnancy, and drowning, right? But in India, that's worldwide, right? So in India, it is the second. The first is accident and the second is by suicide, so that's it. So the sad part is that the reason why we need to have conversations like this again and again is because of another number. 77% of the global suicides, that is more than 3/4 of the global suicides that occur, they occur in middle and lower income group countries. So we, as a country, are very, very susceptible to this as as a national tragedy that happens, and we have to deal with it. So another interesting fact is that 90% of the people who actually commit and go through with suicide have a diagnosis of some kind of a mental health issue. So if Department of Psychology is going to talk about it, so this is something to be taken seriously. And the more we talk about it, the more we take away the shame and the guilt and the blame which is involved in either the system or the people or anyone who is facing it. So I'm going to talk, I'm very excited to hear, other panelists. So I'm going to talk very quickly. I'm going to just make 2 points because I know that, this is a discussion, and I would rather be, be available for Q&A at the end and discuss everything that and including my case studies if required. Because luckily for me in my career spanning, I haven't lost anyone to suicide so far. So even though I have supported and done, so there's a lot that can be done. I'm sure Rashi will be able to share much more on the ground reality of what is actually done. She's an activist, and sure, so is Navendra. But luckily for me, if anyone, the point that I'm trying to make it is, if anyone reaches out, the help is out there. So anytime you feel the need to go through, if you're facing depression or sadness or unexplained, frustration, it is time to reach out. Allow the entire support system to help you, because environment is stronger than will. Whatever you can do alone, you can't imagine where the support can take you, right? So I just want to make 2 points. The first is the overview. I want to deal, because I believe in sanctity of life, right? So why is life worth living? I want to address that as an overview. And then in case, get a little bit, and the second point is a little technical, in case we all face negative thing, and in case you're stuck somewhere, what is the question that you can ask yourself? What are the options? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just in case you want to see whatever. I'm going to read out why I believe in sanctity of life, and I can't do it better than Dr. David Gushee. He is an ethicist, actually. He is a professor of Christian ethics in Mercer University, and I want to share that with you if I can. Give me a second. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Is that visible to people? Yeah. Yep. Thanks.
Yes.
So, yeah, I wanted to begin with the reason why life is important. Why should we begin? This is the premise, and there's no discussion about it. But there's a lot of work which has been done. Every religion in the world treats life as a sacred gift, and there's also a modern definition here. So, Professor David Gushee, he's an ethicist, pastor, author, and an advocate, right? I have his website here for anyone who wants it. So he says, the concept of sanctity of life is the belief that all human beings at any and every stage of life, in any and every state of consciousness or self-awareness, of any and every race, color, ethnicity, level of intelligence, religion, language, gender, character, behavior, physical ability, disability, potential, class, social status, etc., of any and every particular quality of relationship to the viewing subject are to be perceived as person of equal and immeasurable worth and of inviolable dignity. So this, I have that in bold and underlined. Immeasurable worth and inviolable dignity. So even though Dr. Newman was saying that, you don't have a right to take your life. So here's the reason why. Because life is immeasurable worthy. I mean, your living is more important because it's immeasurable. You do not know the potential of whatever it is, whether it's you, your friend, or anyone that you know, or anytime you feel hopeless, helpless, frustrated, remember, any and every life is of immeasurable worth and of inviolable dignity, right? So this is from Professor Gushee's paper, which was published by Center of Bioethics and Human Dignity in Trinity International College, right? So this is my second point. So if sanctity of life is so important, let's do a little bit of ancestral maths, right? So here you are. In case for you to be born, what did you need, right? We all needed 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and their grandparents, so 8 great grandparents, and the process continues, right, down to the 9th great grandparents. So for you to be born today, you, me, and everyone here and everyone out there in the world, for us to be born today from 12 previous generations, you needed a sum total of 4,094 ancestors over the last 400 years. And I have the source quoted there. You can go and look at it. So why is life worthy? Because look at how hard the nature has to work to make you live today. How many struggles, how many battles, difficulties, sadness, happiness, love stories, hope. What did people have to go through? What did our ancestors have to go through for us to exist at this particular moment? Is that even, isn't it immeasurable? And it is of inviolable dignity. So no matter how hopeless, how helpless, how sad you feel, the sanctity of life is paramount. So this is one thing. If there's only one thing that you have to take away from, from my time of talking to you, it is this: trust in the sanctity of life. Life is important. Wherever your struggles, believe me, 4,000 people have struggled before you to get you here. So yes. So and you do not know where your struggles are going to take you. And if it finds difficult, if you find it difficulty, then there's the next point that I'm trying to make. Overview done. Let's get into the nitty-gritties. We all get upset, right? So how do we talk to ourselves when we are upset? Because bad communication can end a lot of good things in suicide, but not only just suicide ideation, but despair, frustration, anger, depression. And self-analysis is a closed circuit. it can trap us into a mental health of our own making. Because once we get into a route, we cannot think differently, because if we are doing it over and over again, the moment I'm sure the psychology, if you have been invited by psychology professors, they have told you that the survivor brain, it works only in a loop under threat. The moment we are threatened, the thinking part of our brains is shut down. So self-analysis is going to keep us hooked in one place of survival mode, of fight, flight, or freeze. So how is it? How can we learn from these mistakes and tragedies or successes or anything and grow? If we are hurting, what might help? That is the point that I'm making, and that's the second one. We have to understand that, we have to, self-analysis can be stuck here with this question, why? Because asking why is like looking into the rear view mirror, so I'm sure a lot of you drive, right? So when you're driving and when you look at the rear view mirror, you can only see what's behind of you, right? So, and there's also a psychological reason behind. The moment you ask yourself a question like, why me? Why does this only happen to me? Why did only this question come in exam? Why do my parents catch me only when I am playing games and not when I'm studying? Anytime you ask yourself why, what happens, I'm sure in psychology, there's something called recency effect. So it has been applied very liberally, even by, people from marketing industry and a lot of other people in the, in economics. It has been really applied widely. So when you get into a store, we all tend to look at things which are placed in a certain place, right? When you enter the place where you see, and things onto your right, you'll always see things on your right much more than you see your left. And also, this is a recency effect. There's a science behind it. Why is it that your eyes first move on this side and only then the other side? Mm-hmm. Then there is recency effect, which I'm talking about, is also, it recurs and gets into a loop when you're asking yourself the question, why? Suppose you had a fight with your parents yesterday, right? And in your anger, you said, okay, fine, I'm leaving the house and going. And they said, yes, you can go out, and you walk out in a half and go and stay the night with your friend. And you imagine that, this is it. Now they're never going to take me back. And this relationship is, I don't know how to mend this now, right? And that day, when you come to college and everyone says, oh, say two nice things about your parents, this is Father's Day or Mother's Day, say something nice. And last night your mom was yelling at you. So what are you going to think? Because right now, if someone asks you why, it is going to create an alternative fact. So you're not going to remember 20 odd years of their struggle to bring you up. You're going to just remember what happened last night. And over time, it is going to cloud your self-perception, right? So the point is that why? Every time we ask ourselves the question, why is this happening to me again? Why me? Why this question? Why anything? Why followed by anything? You're looking at the rear view mirror. It keeps you stuck right there. But if you can ask yourself this, what? If you can ask yourself the question, what? That might help you look through the windscreen now. What is more important to me? Is it important for me to mend my relationship and go back home? Because, I realize this, my friend cannot keep me the entire day. Or if you've had a fight with a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you think the relationship is over, that's it. Now they are not going to talk to you again. And what is more important to me? Having a partner, having a friend, going back and mending relationships. Here, another portal opens. Now we are not locked into our survival mode. We are trying to access a different part of our brain. It shifts the brain activity to another part. Plus, it starts giving you option. Now you start thinking differently. What can I do to stop this? So anytime you are feeling stuck in any place, ask yourself, am I asking why or am I asking what? Right? So this is a psychologist and the life coach in me talking to you and saying that, hey, believe in sanctity of life. Don't stay stuck in the why question, because you always have a second chance, and that's tomorrow, right? So I don't know if I'm exceeded my time or not, but I'm going to stop here, and I'll be available for question answers after this, and I look forward to hearing other panelists.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think this was both practical as well as it gave a good macro perspective on contextualizing suicide as a concept as well. I think I liked especially the part where you talked about the science behind not asking why and asking what, right? And how that sometimes asking simple questions, maybe since I also come from a psychology background, I think even with therapy, it's more about asking the right question than providing answers. So I think even when we do that for ourselves, like you mentioned, it changes our self-perception, it changes our feeling of stuckness and moves us from survival mode to flourishing. And I also liked the understanding of suicide with relation to ethics and seeing our life, seeing the sanctity of our life. So I think if I could make concise all the things you've said, it would be summed up in one thing which you said, which is we should trust in the sanctity of life. So I really appreciate you joining us today. And of course, we've already got a few questions. We'll be taking it at the end of the session, but we request the participants to share whatever they like now, and we'll be taking it up later. But thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our next speaker, Ms. Rashi Takran. Ms. Rashi is a mental health advocate and social activist. She's currently an incoming graduate at Warwick Business School, and she's also a Women's Indian Chamber of Commerce, and she's also a council member of the WICCI and a certified QPR instructor. As a change member from Change.org's flagship program, She Creates Change, she has undertaken various projects in order to raise her voice against social injustice within the country. In July 2019, she started a petition asking the government to launch a national helpline number for suicide prevention in India, which has received more than 3.9 lakh signatures. This led to the creation of the Kiran Mental Health Rehabilitation Helpline number, which was launched by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment on 7 September 2020. Before I hand it over to ma'am, I would request those who have any questions for her to share it in the chat, and we'll pose them to her after she shares, as she has another commitment. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us despite your busy schedule, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Janki ma'am, it was very enlightening, and I'm really happy that I get to share the stage with all of you all. I don't think I'm an expert in this area. I am, although a survivor myself. I'm a suicide loss survivor, and today I just want to share my story so that maybe that can help someone out there who might be struggling like right now, who might feel that, you know, they don't have anywhere else to go. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. There's just a small presentation that I've made for you, and just to share my story very briefly. It's called Moving Forward, Healing Through Initiatives, because that's what I've tried to achieve through all the work that I've been doing in the mental health space. And let me just take you back a little bit to the year 2019, which was probably the year that changed my life forever. And it was the night of 6th January 2019. It was around 8:45 p.m. when I was in my house and my doorbell rang. And I was in my room and I could vaguely hear my dad sort of open the door, and he rushed out. He mumbled something and he rushed out of the house. So I was obviously a little confused. I wasn't really sure what was happening. So I gave him a call, and after a few rings, he picked up, and I realized that he was crying. So something you need to know about my dad is that I've never seen or heard him cry. No one has. And that night, when I heard him weep on the phone, I was just very, very scared internally. I just thought something had happened to him. So I was just asking him, Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay? And then he said something that will sort of, it haunts me to this day. He said, Raghav is gone. Raghav was my younger brother. He was my best friend. And this is our family, just to give you a gist. And he was the kind of person who wanted to help out everyone and never asked for anything in return. He truly believed in helping people out, in being there for others. And on 6th January 2019, we lost him to suicide. Obviously, the shock of it was something that we're still coming to terms with. It's shocking, it's unexpected, and it just completely shatters you as a person. The days that followed were really, really difficult for us as a family because, there was a lot of guilt, there was a lot of trauma and grief, yes, but also a lot of regret because I think Janki ma'am also talked about the question why, and those were the questions that really haunted us in the days that followed. During this time, we were also introduced to the 4 S's, which come with suicide or death by suicide. That was the stigma, the shame, the silence, and the secrecy that surrounds death by suicide. So most people who knew us wanted us to not talk about it, didn't want to accept that it was what it was. And even when I started talking about it later on and I started sharing my story, a lot of people who I knew personally opposed it. It was because of the shame and the secrecy. Another thing that I was talking about was the question why, right? So we all have that question, why do we die? That's like an unanswered mystery for a lot of us. But what happens with suicide is that question, why do we die, often reshapes into why did my loved one choose to die? And this was the question that haunted me the most because I did not have an answer for this. And honestly, the only person who could answer this question was not around anymore. So I didn't know why my brother did what he did. I also asked myself, why me? Why my family? Why my brother? Why did I not realize or understand? Or why did he not come to me? Why did he not talk to me? Did we not create a safe space? And I think, again, these questions would not let me sleep at night, because of which I started struggling with my own mental health in the months that followed. I could not sleep at night, like I said. I was struggling with insomnia. I would get panic attacks, anxiety attacks in the middle of the night. I had flashbacks from the night. It was literally like I was stuck on a loop, and I was just basically reliving that night over and over again with different scenarios in my head. And it was definitely taking a toll on me. I was crying all the time and I didn't know what to do or whom to reach out to. That's when I told my parents. I just went to them and I said to them that I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what's wrong with me. I cannot go on like this and I need help. And my parents, being the best parents in the world, they decided to take me to a doctor. They decided that I need help. And this is when we went to a psychiatrist. I was diagnosed with clinical anxiety, PTSD, and insomnia. Obviously, what followed was a series of therapy sessions, which really helped me cope, because I think the biggest problem that I personally was facing was the fact that I was not able to come to terms with my trauma. And I was bottling all of those emotions, all of that trauma, and not talking about it. So grief counseling, bereavement therapy really helped. In addition to that, we also, like the doctor put me on medication, which helped me with my sleep and my anxiety. But I think the thing that helped me most finally was finding meaning in my loss. And this happened a little later on because I realized that I wanted to work in this space. I wanted to work in the space of mental health and suicide prevention. I am an engineer, so I have finished my engineering in the year 2019. So I was literally in my final semester. I was placed. I was supposed to pick up an IT job, but I decided to leave all of that behind because I knew that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in this space because there's so much need for it. And I knew if I had to do something, it had to be something related to suicide prevention. So obviously I started researching, I started talking to people, I started sharing my story and my experiences. And in the meantime, I also applied to the Change.org fellowship. I got through, I got selected. And as Marianne already said, I decided to start a petition with Change.org. This petition was basically asking the government of India to launch a national helpline number for suicide prevention. Because believe it or not, at that point, we did not have a helpline number, which was number 124/7, or was nationally recognized. We did have a lot of helpline numbers which were run by NGOs. And during my research, I tried to call all of them, but most of them went unanswered. A lot of the numbers were switched off, and I think only 3 of them responded and picked up my call, which I think was personally very alarming for me. And also the fact that it wasn't 24/7. So my biggest ask was that the helpline number needs to be 24/7, because it's a proven fact that it's between the time of 12 a.m. and 4 a.m. when people get those kind of thoughts the most. That's the most difficult time. That's the most lonely time for a person. And that's also the time when you might not have a friend who's awake, or you might not have a family member who's awake or there with you. So that's when these helpline numbers come into the picture. And just knowing that someone else will be listening to you on the other end of the line just makes all the difference. So that was my ask. I really wasn't sure how people would respond to my petition, because I was literally putting myself, my brother, my entire family in that limelight. I was sharing my story. I was putting it out there into the world. And this being such a taboo subject, a lot of people told me not to. A lot of people told me that people will judge you. People will call you names. You just maybe want to leave this all behind and move on. Like, people say you want to move on and not talk about this, just sort of brush it under the carpet. But that's not what I wanted to do. And finally, once the petition was online, I was very surprised to see the kind of support, the kind of response that we got. This is an older screenshot, but at this moment, we have close to 4 lakh signatures. At the time we declared victory, we had close to 4 lakh signatures. The campaign completely blew up. Across the country, people were reaching out, people were talking about it, people were sharing the story, people were sharing petitions and signing it. And I think the biggest thing that I noticed was that people now felt comfortable to come and talk about it openly, to come and talk about their struggles, because they, through this petition, they were able to come and share their own traumas, their own stories, their own struggles with their mental health. And I think that was the biggest change that I saw, not just within my immediate surrounding, but across the country. And finally, after a year of just working really, really hard towards making this a reality, on 7th September 2020, that is last year, September, the government launched the Kiran helpline number, which is a 24/7 helpline number for people seeking mental health counseling. It is a toll-free number. Like I said, it's 24/7. It's available in 13 different languages, and it has people, more than 600 mental health professionals are working for this helpline number, and it has helped thousands of people across the country. So this was a big victory for all of us. And this was basically my campaign, in addition to a lot of other mental health related work that I've been doing since the year 2019. In addition to all of this, on a very personal front, also, we constantly try to honor Raghav's memory every single day. I personally do not want anyone to remember Raghav by the way he died, but I want them to remember by the way he lived. And because of this, we also launched a book in his memory. It's called Liberation Through the Bridge of Insanity, which is a collection of poems and short stories and narratives which were written by Raghav in the span of 18 years that he was with us. He was an amazing writer. He was an amazing poet. And we sort of combined all of his poetry and put this into one book, so that he would live on forever through his work. It's obviously available on Amazon, and you can always reach out if there's something that you want to read. Coming to the fact that how you can help, how you can sort of become a part of this moment, it's really not that difficult, because honestly, I think we've talked about this earlier as well, that all of us have a role to play. All of us can save a life. And do not ever think that you can't do anything. Don't ever think that only professionals, mental health professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists can help people who might be in distress or who might be thinking about suicide. No, all of us have a role to play. And this is what you can do. It's just some bullet points that I want to share. There's obviously a lot more that we can all do, but maybe we can start here. First of all, don't awfulize or demonize suicide. You know, a lot of times we tend to say that, oh, suicide is a sin, it's a crime, you will go to hell for doing this. Or think about your family members, think about your parents. We also tend to say things like, it's all in your head, it'll pass, it's a phase, you're overreacting. Or look at other people, they have it worse than you. Why are you feeling this way? Do not demonize the person. Do not make them feel guilty. Do not guilt trip them or blame them, because we want to change the narrative of suicide from blame and judgment to compassion and empathy. Finally, use the correct terminology. A lot of times when it comes to suicide or talk surrounding suicide, we do not use the right vocabulary. So these are just very small things that we can all follow, because the language matters, right? We can maybe say, instead of committed suicide, we can say they died by suicide. Instead of saying successful or unsuccessful suicide, we can say it was a fatal suicide or it was a suicide attempt. These small changes in our vocabulary can go a really, really long way in normalizing talk surrounding it. Also, don't be afraid to talk about suicide. The biggest misconception that I feel we have, and this is the biggest myth that I want to sort of bust today, that people think that talking about suicide or asking the suicide question to someone else might put that idea in their heads. But that's not true. It's actually quite the opposite. If you talk about suicide, if you ask someone if they're thinking about suicide, having suicidal thoughts, it's more probable that they will feel comfortable enough to share that with you. It will open a two-way conversation and it'll create a safe space, because they'll know that nothing is off the table. So please never internalize this. Never be afraid to ask the suicide question or the S question. Just be forward and ask that question. Try to listen to the person instead of focusing on your own responses. And this is something that comes under active listening, which we really try to teach everyone. If you want to become a better listener, if you want to become an active listener, there are some things that you need to follow. Like, pay your full attention to that person, give that full attention to that person. Also, do not interrupt them or do not rush them, because, that'll just make that conversation that much more difficult for the two of you. So, do that. And also, it's really important that we are non-judgmental. Non-judgmental listening is a very, very important part of active listening. Educate and normalize. Don't just educate yourself, but also educate other people and normalize the conversation for other people as well. And finally, like I said, we want to change the narrative from blame and judgment to empathy and compassion. So practice empathy and compassion. Try to inculcate that in your day-to-day lives. And yeah, just be there for other people. Be there for people you care about. Another thing that we can all practice for suicide prevention is QPR. The QPR training, as some of you might know, is a suicide prevention training, is the gatekeeper training, and it trains you as a first responder to be able to help someone who might be in distress. So basically, as someone who may be in the best possible position to prevent suicide, you will find that QPR is designed to help you save a life. And QPR consists of 3 very important skills. That is questioning a person about suicide, persuading that person to seek support and seek help. And once they're ready to seek help, it's about referring that person to an appropriate resource, which could be a mental health professional, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, anyone. So this is something that you all can partake in and become better listeners and become first responders when it comes to suicide prevention. Finally, I just want to end with this little quote. Suicide is a very layered and complex issue, and it is not simple. It's not black or white, and a lot of conversation needs to happen around it. A lot is still left to understand. And that's why we all need to work together, because like I said, suicide prevention is everyone's business. All of us have a role to play, and all of us need to have a role in suicide prevention. So with this, I would end my um, talk, and thank you so much again for having me.
Thank you so much for accepting. I think also thank you so much for sharing your journey with us so openly and wonderfully. And also for the work that you're doing and you continue to do. I find you very inspiring. And it's nice to see how you've turned your trauma into something that can give back to others. So thank you so much. And I'm sure our students will use many of the QPR strategies as well as the few things that you mentioned to help others around them as well. So thank you. We'll just take a few questions if you don't mind, Rashi.
Sure.
Yeah. So one question in the chat was, how can we be able to empathize with a person who is very stable and bold but is still contemplating suicide?
You know, like I said, a lot of people who are thinking about suicide, in a lot of cases, you do not see them as someone who might need help. They do not show it. They become really good at hiding that. The fact that they're struggling, they become really good at hiding that, which I think was also the case with my brother, which is why you cannot even fathom that, oh, this is something that might be going on in their heads. So if that person is very bold, if that person is cracking jokes, let's say, if that person is happy and jolly, but you still have an inkling that, okay, maybe something is wrong, please always be open to asking the suicide question. And that's something that we really emphasize on. When you're in doubt, please ask the question. It will not, make it awkward. It will not plant any ideas in their heads. It will not encourage them in any way. In fact, it will encourage them to open up and talk to you and have a proper conversation, a two-way conversation. So that's very important. I think most of the times, people who are like this, people who don't let it show, people who are very bold and happy, sometimes they are the saddest. And it's all the more difficult for us to sometimes point that out or find that out. So always ask that question, start a conversation. I think conversations can go such a long way. It can literally save lives.
So can I add to that, Marianne?
Yes. Yes,
So
sure.
another thing that I would like to say is that one thing to look out for, because she mentioned QPR also, that, another thing even if people are bold and they're laughing or they're happy, are they behaving out of context? Are they too happy? Are they making a joke of something which they normally don't joke? I mean, are they saying, oh, when they're making light of something, something is going on in your head. If you're asking this question, that, if they're very bold and stable and they're still thinking about it, then is something out of ordinary? Because the moment you notice something is out of ordinary, that is the time to ask that S question. That, hey, are you thinking of doing away something? Are you thinking of doing something foolish? Are you planning to take away your life? What is it that you're planning? I don't understand. Please explain. So there's no shame or this thing in trying to understand, okay, maybe you are not thinking, but tell me, so that I'm just so in the clear, so just go ahead. You have to wait for when they are behaving out of context in some way. And that's the red flag to look out for.
Yes, I agree with you. And also, like Rashi mentioned, I think also the World Health Organization had that initiative of Let's Talk. I think even just having regular conversations about taboo topics, whether it's to ask someone personally or not, something like this panel discussion or just in everyday life, it kind of breaks that stigma and opens the gate for communication in everyday life, like with our families or smaller groups. Although I'm not a panelist, I just felt like sharing that as well. Right. And one more thing in the chat was a comment about how sometimes when you go to a counselor itself, just with questions about suicide, that is perceived as, something taboo. So do you have any thoughts about this, Rashi?
Oh, I think honestly, Janki would be a better person to talk about this part about going to a therapist. But I think sharing my personal opinion, since I have been there and I have sought help in terms of my mental health as well, I think there is still stigma. People still feel a little awkward. You sometimes still have to help them or coax them into seeking support. But it always helps. Getting your thoughts sorted, getting your thoughts sorted and getting that help from someone else, from a third person, is just it changes your life. It changes you as a person. So a third perspective always helps. But to begin with, if you feel like, okay, I can't talk to a professional, maybe start with a trusted person that you feel like you can talk to. It could be a family member, it could be a very close friend, whatever it is. Just have that conversation. Doesn't have to be that, okay, straight away you go to a professional. Sometimes people are not comfortable with that, and that's completely okay, because you can't force people to go seek help. That's also something that we talk about in QPR, that while it's great to persuade them, while it's great to give them those resources, you cannot handhold them and take them if they are not ready for it. When they're ready, that's the time when they will actually, they can get help. So do not force people, but again, just let them know that just talking about it to someone they trust can go a really long way. And eventually they might be ready. They might come to a point where they're like, okay, maybe a professional can actually help. So yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. And one final question was, is there something we can do for someone who is a suicide loss survivor?
Yes. Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot that you can do. I think if you know that person, if they're close to you, if it's a person you care about, I think just making sure that they know that you're there for them makes all the difference. I think I got muted.
Yeah.
So that can make all the difference. Just you being there sometimes. You don't even have to say anything or give them advice or make things right or fix things, because in these cases you cannot fix anything. You might really want to, but you can't fix anything. But sometimes just being there for that person can go a really long way. And another thing that we talk about a lot is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement might not be able to fix anything, but it can make things better. So instead of saying things like that, oh, I've been there, try this, you'll feel better, or try that, you'll feel better, or let's go partying and stuff like that. Just let that person sit in their pain. Sometimes allowing that person to just sit in their pain, and sometimes also sitting with them in that pain, can go a really long way. Just telling them that I acknowledge what you're going through and I'm really sorry, but I'm here for you. Just saying these words to them can create that safe space. So don't try to fix them, just be there for them, just acknowledge that pain, and if it's possible, sit with them in it. It might be a little awkward first, but that's what goes like a really long way, and it really helps. So yeah, that's something that you can do.
Thank you so much. I don't think there are any other questions, but I'm sure that if it's okay with you, we could share your email ID if anyone is interested in asking any further questions. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I know you're running short of time, so thank you very much for being
Not
with
at
us.
all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah. We'll move on with our panel discussion to our final speaker, Mr. Navendra Uduman. Mr. Navendra is a practicing counselor and trained psychotherapist based in Sri Lanka. His areas of interest include community mental health awareness, training and capacity building, individual psychotherapy, and psychological first aid. He is the founder of Footsteps to Yes, sorry. I was just saying that he is the founder of Footsteps to Freedom, which aims to raise awareness on mental health and suicide prevention. As part of this, he walked 550 kilometers from Dondra to Point Pedro in 2016, and in 2018 he walked 1,460 kilometers around the entire coastline of Sri Lanka in order to raise awareness on mental health and suicide prevention. He's also the co-founder of the Community Crisis Response Team, which is a group of people trained in emergency response. Thank you, sir, so much for joining us today. I should mention also that he delivered on-site crisis counseling and facilitated workshops on coping with crisis for survivors of the Easter Sunday attacks that took place in Sri Lanka in 2019. We're so grateful that you could spend time with us today, sir. Over to you.
Okay. Right. Am I audible and can you see me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
We can see you and hear you.
Okay. I can't see myself for some reason, so I'm just going to talk to the screen. Thank you so much for having me, and I think it's a real honor to be here today and share my experiences with you. It's always, it's a subject very close to my heart, and also India is a country that is really close to my heart as well, especially Bangalore, because that's where I spent 6 years of my life studying, and so anything to do with Bangalore and something that I love, it's always a pleasure to be here, so thank you. All right, so before I get started, I just want to say that throughout this webinar today, we have been talking about suicide as a topic, or suicide prevention. And I want to say that sometimes when we talk about something like this that is quite heavy, that has been considered a taboo, and some of us may have been affected by it in different ways, that it can sort of create discomfort for us sometimes when we are listening to content around this, or it can make us sometimes feel upset, maybe because we might be we might remember something that has happened in the past, or we may remember someone we have lost to suicide. So I just want to say that if you feel uncomfortable, or if you feel like you're in distress during or after this whole webinar, it's really important that you talk to someone, right, about what you're feeling as well. So it could be a friend, it could be a helpline. So make sure that you get help if you feel like you're struggling after listening to this webinar today. If I talk to you a little bit about context as to why this is so important to me and why I'm so passionate about this, is because I come from a island, a little country just below you. I'm sure all of you know where Sri Lanka is. And I think your principal spoke about Sri Lanka as well in his initial speech. So Sri Lanka is a little island with 21.8 million people living in it at the moment. And out of that, every year, approximately 3,000 people die by suicide. Right, and we have a very painful history with it, because in the years 95 and 96, we were the country with the highest rate of suicide in the world. Right, we were number one, with the rate being at that time 47 per 100,000 population. Right, so we had about 20 or more people dying by suicide every day at that time in Sri Lanka, and one of the common sort of populations that died by suicide at that time were farmers, right? So throughout the years, if you look at from 95, 96, now we are in 2021, if you look at the trajectory since then, there has been a reduction in the number of deaths by suicide, right? Every year, we've seen a very steady decline in the numbers of deaths, but that doesn't mean that the attempt rate has decreased. We as a country, I think we still have a very high suicide attempt rate, those who attempt and survive suicide an attempt, right? So at the moment, if you look at last year's statistics from the police, Sri Lanka police, we know that about 3,074 people lost their lives to suicide. And out of that, interestingly, even though we often pay a lot of attention to the age group between, say, 15 to 30 when we talk about the most at-risk groups, last year in my country, we found that the highest number was of people over the age of 71 who took their lives, right? And then the lowest age recorded was 8. So between 8 to 16, we had about 85 deaths last year, and about 345 deaths for people above the age of 71. So that brings to light how complex an issue suicide is, because it's not sometimes as simple as we might think it to be, or read about it in the internet and so on, right? There's a lot of complexity, a lot of layers, like I think Rashi also very nicely spoke about before, that we really need to think about. And another reason why this is so important to me is because I lost a classmate to suicide while I was studying in Bangalore. This was during my bachelor's, and I was not in India at that time. I had gone on exchange to another country, and I found that one of my classmates had taken her life, and that really shattered me. and it was quite difficult because we couldn't be there for just to see her, the final time and for her funeral and so on. So that always sticks with me when I talk about suicide, or when I do training of any sorts related to suicide prevention. I think that story really sticks with me, because we were learning psychology, we were talking about this as well in our classes, and yet we lost someone to suicide. To talk a little bit about what I've been doing over the years, so I've been working in Sri Lanka for the past 7 years after I graduated in Bangalore in 2014 with my master's. Since then, one of the key things I've been doing is providing gatekeeper training for communities in the country, right? That is not just in the city, but also outside of the city in many rural areas as well, where I've been educating people on just regular people, right? They're not professionals, they're not government officials, they're not anything to do with that, but just regular people, training them, giving them the basic knowledge on how to recognize warning signs of someone who may be at risk of not just suicide, but also just talking about mental health problems in general as well. And how to provide that basic initial support. So almost being a first responder, like Rashi was talking about, right? So that's what I've been involved in a lot. And I've also been advocating for the language use around suicide, and for the ways in which the media reports suicide, for changes to be made, because that also does play a role as to why we still have a very serious public health problem when it comes to suicide, is because of what we call contagion suicides or copycat suicides, where because of inappropriate or unethical reporting in the media, more lives are lost in my country. And I think in India also, in history, I think you might have seen the same thing happening, right? So I think Miss Marianne spoke about 2 of the walks that I've done to raise awareness about mental health and suicide prevention. I just want to take you through both of them quickly, and just tell you a few stories that I remember and that kind of struck me during both those walks. So in 2016, I walked from the southernmost point of Sri Lanka, which is Dondra. There's a beautiful lighthouse there. And then I walked till the northernmost point, right, the tip of the island, which is called Point Pedro. And that walk took me 44 days of walking about 25 kilometers on average, and completely about 550 kilometers. And throughout the walk, we were stopping by. It could be schools, it could be police stations, it could be military establishments, it could be post offices, just regular shops, government offices, even private offices like banks, and so on and so forth along the way. And we delivered very short but important sessions around creating awareness about this topic, and just giving people that basic information that they need in order to recognize when there's a problem and avenues in which they can seek help, right? So while walking, we also I also came across a lot of people who we stopped, just randomly we would stop and talk to them on the road, or we would meet them at a session that we've done and talk to them. And often when they knew that we were walking for this cause, they actually did open up without even us having to ask them anything. They opened up and told us their stories, told us their pain. And we did come across a lot of people who were also at that time contemplating taking their life, or they have thought about that in the past. So a lot of the time, by just allowing a space for people to talk safely, right? Safely in the sense where they feel psychologically safe to talk without the fear of being judged or shamed or ridiculed or humiliated. I think that was a very important learning for me, because soon as you create that opening, soon as you create that space with your body language, with your tone of voice, with how you look at someone else, with the way you talk to them, I think it opens up a space where that person can feel safe, feel like there is a safe space for them to start sharing. And this I've come across over and over and over again in my work over the last few years. And that's something I hold really important, the fact that by listening, which is a really powerful thing that we can do. You don't have to be a professional or someone like an expert in mental health to do that. You can just be you as a human being and choose to listen rather than give advice or solutions to people or try to fix people. And therefore, we are then able to really create change. And sometimes we'll never know we created change, but that person, sometimes if asked years later as to what stopped them from taking their life or what made them go for help, a lot of people would say that it's because someone chose to listen, right? So that is a constant thing that I came across during the walk, the first walk that I did. And also how the attitudes around suicide changes from geographical location to location, right? So I think Rashi spoke about a few myths and misconceptions that are prevalent about suicide globally, but it's the same in Sri Lanka. We have a lot of misconception around this that cause a lot of harm in the community as well, especially these misconceptions around people seeking attention by attempting suicide or talking about suicide or feelings, or someone, just choosing to be selfish and not think about the people they love, and therefore just sort of condemning them because they have had thoughts about suicide. So these kinds of attitudes were quite prevalent around the country as well. And I think the intersection of religious ideas, of cultural ideas, of societal ideas, and also personal beliefs, I found that makes it sometimes really challenging for people to access support, even though there is support around the country, right? So then I came back from the walk and I continued to kind of do my the work that I do. And in 2018, I felt that it wasn't enough. I wanted to do more, right? And I wanted to touch the lives of people around the country where information doesn't flow to normally, because not everyone has access to the internet, not everyone has access to the TV or the radio. So there are lots of communities who are left behind from this information. So not everyone in Sri Lanka can attend a webinar like we are doing today, right? So that motivated me to want to really go into the deepest rural areas in the country and start talking. So two of my friends and I, we decided to go. So it took us 73 days, the second time, and we did about 1,460 kilometers in, so while doing about 100 sessions along the way at different places. So similar to the first walk. So I want to tell you a story from that walk, which really is important, right? So we were in the southern coast, walking down the southern coast of Sri Lanka, which took us about 10 or more days, right? And the interesting thing was, each time we stopped by at a particular town, there was a suicidal death that had happened that day. So can you imagine, let's say we walked across 10 to 15 towns. So each of those towns had a death by suicide that had happened the day that we were walking through it. And that just made me realize how much of how still it is such a complex problem and an urgent public health problem, even though we might minimize it or trivialize it most of the time, right? The numbers only tell us so much. The statistics only tell us so much, but the real stories are out there in the grassroots, right? Where a girl who was raped and was ashamed to talk about it with her parents or to tell someone about it took her life when we were walking through that town. Another boy because he had failed an exam. And there were countless stories like this, right? And I found that the more we talked about it, the more we sort of let people know that it's okay to talk about it, because I think that is another misconception, that talking about this in public forums is not healthy because it might give people ideas. But actually research tells us that that is not the case. Talking about it doesn't put ideas in someone's head, right? So I found that more people started opening up. And there was this one incident where we were walking one day, we were really dehydrated because it's hot. And we stopped by a king coconut shop. So it's similar to your tender coconut that you get in Bangalore, right? A little shop, we stopped by and we asked for king coconut to drink. And the shopkeeper came out and he asked us, where are you guys going with your backpacks and stuff? And we said, we're walking around the country for this cause to raise awareness. And without batting an eyelid, he just opened up then and there and said, in our local language, in Sinhala, he said, sir, I've been feeling that same way and I still feel that same way, that I just want to, end my life because of the pain that I'm going through. So one of the key things I learned, and I still continue to really believe in, is that it's not, people don't attempt suicide because they want to die necessarily. No one likes to die, right? But most people attempt suicide because they want to end the pain that they feel, right? Or they don't see another solution to their pain. They don't see another way out. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So we have to get out of this idea that people attempt suicide because they just want to die, or because they're attention seeking. But we have to understand in a compassionate way that it's about really them at that point not seeing a way out of the darkness that they feel. And this is something I come across in my counseling practice as well as my community work as well. So I think Rashi already spoke about a lot of things that I wanted to talk about as well. So I'm not going to touch on those things. But I want to say is, you choosing to be a part of this webinar today, and your teachers and your administration in your college choosing to organize this webinar today, tells me that this is a great opportunity for you to be first responders in your community. That could be in the area that you live, it could be in your college, it could be in another society or a club that you're a part of, to be a first responder, or what we call a gatekeeper, right? So if you look at a person who is in distress and who may be having thoughts about suicide, and professional counseling, psychological, psychiatric services, right? So there's a bit of a gap where that person has to take a bit of a leap to reach whoever that person might be, who is a professional who can help. And while that is absolutely important to do, there's another person who can be in the middle between these two people, right? Act as a conduit, if you want to call it that. And that is you. That is you, the gatekeeper. If you are aware enough to be able to recognize the warning signs and ask the S question like Rashid spoke about earlier, you might just be the conduit who then creates that opening for that person to get professional help. And you might just be the person who actually prevents them from choosing to take their life, right? I'll tell you a quick story before I end my talk today. There's this famous bridge called the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco in the US. I'm sure most of you guys have seen pictures or read about it. This is a really popular bridge internationally because it's so beautiful and iconic, right? But it's popular for another reason, and that reason is that people from all over the world go there to take their lives by jumping into the water, right? So because of this problem, the California Highway Patrol, who patrol that bridge, the police, they were trained, most of them were trained in crisis intervention on how to talk to someone who might be wanting to attempt suicide, right? So there was this sergeant, his name was Kevin Briggs. He's known as the guardian of the Golden Gate Bridge, right? One day he was patrolling the bridge when he came across this guy. His name was also Kevin, who had crossed the railing to the other side of the bridge, basically, which means that he's on the side of the water. And he was just standing on a little ledge, still contemplating whether he should end his life or not, right? And this guy, the sergeant, he just went and started a conversation, asked him about him, asked him what his pain is, asked him to describe his pain, what is going on, what has brought him here that has made him want to end his life. And that conversation, where the person on the other side of the bridge was talking, went on for 90 minutes or more, where the sergeant was just listening, right? He didn't try to persuade this guy to come to the other side, or he didn't try to give advice or tell that person how stupid he is being, but he just chose to listen. And finally, at the last minute, this guy, Kevin, was convinced to come back to this side for whatever reason, right? And he did come across the railing to the safe side. And then when this sergeant asked him, hey, so what convinced you in the end? He just said a very powerful but simple thing. He said, you listened. So that's the message I want to give you today, is that by choosing to listen rather than to give solutions and advice and fix people, by actually choosing to sit silently even with that other person, by choosing to not get distracted by your mobile phone or your watch, not being distracted by your need to solve the problem, but you actually being present with that person's pain and listening to them, can go a long way that you can't even possibly imagine, right? So once again, thank you so much for having me. And I think it's a real honor to be here today. And over to you, Miss Marianne. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devendra. I think what I understood from what you shared was that suicide could firstly influence anyone, right? I'm sorry, affect anyone, right? As you mentioned about age and other factors. And I think one of the factors you addressed about the media, especially, is very important in how they portray suicide. Also, how our religious, cultural, and personal beliefs often play a role in the way in which we seek help or we don't seek help. And most importantly, I think the idea of just starting conversations as well as just listening as the most important tool in suicide prevention is something that's stuck out for me. So thank you so much for sharing about your experiences in suicide prevention, as well as some very practical suggestions for our students to become gatekeepers as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
So the floor is now open for questions. Already some questions have been posed. I'll be reading them out to the panelists. You can continue to ask questions. We have about half an hour for questions, all right? So the first question is to Ms. Jonaki. How can friends support suicide attempt survivors, especially when everyone is traumatized about the incident?
Good question, huh? That's a good question. So the thing is to understand, like, Rashi and Devendra, they both were talking about pain is real. Okay. I could hear it in Rashi and, and as the case studies that Devendra was sharing and whoever else has brushed it. And I have at least 3 ongoing present clients whose family somewhere or the other there has been suicide. So the truth is pain is real, but then so is hope. So the whole point is to err and to figure out how to change the energy of that moment, So yes, one is by listening. I think, Rashi said active listening, and, Navindra said listening, capital letters and thing, listening. So yes, listening, yes. But if it can be followed up by a little bit of what after this, because people who are stuck in that position, they are not able to see beyond. They are stuck in that why and the pain, and that pain is really, really real. So if we want to help others, we have to first take care of ourselves. Where is our energy? Are we in the position to help others? That is the first question to ask ourselves. Because if we don't, then we hand them over. This QPR thing is question, persuade, and refer. So you refer them to someone. So you handhold them and take that, what, I'm going to book a session for you, or what, let's go and talk to this person, or whoever it is that they are ready to talk to. But the point is that if you really want to help others, you have to learn to take care of yourself first. First point is, you have to do the basic things which keep your energy high, so that you can look beyond just the sorrow, because it's very easy to get caught up in this whole vortex of sadness, especially if you're listening to sad stories, if you're dealing with something with so traumatic, and people, they think that their life is ended if they've gone through rape, or if they have gone through some death in the family. They think that they have died, a part of you has died with them, and it's very difficult for them to find hope. So I would say, since hope is real, keep your energies high. Figure out to ask the right questions after the silence hits, after the end of that conversation. If you can be present, what can I do for you now, so that, you believe in our friendship, or what can I do for you so that you feel a little better? Because I am a diehard, what can I say, optimist. I believe that any situation that happens in life can be turned around to be a gift or a lesson of some sort. So yes, it is sad, and the world has a lot of sadness, but we can choose to be a part of hope and light.
So I think I gather from what you say, it's a lot about choices as well, choosing to be a certain way.
Yeah.
There are some questions for Rashi. Rashi, are you still here? I can see your thing.
Yeah, hi, I'm here.
Yeah. Is it okay if we ask you a few questions, Rashi, because there are still some questions for you?
Sure.
Yeah, there is one question, which is people don't take an appropriate approach towards sensitive conversations. How do we change that?
Right. Yes, the right approach to sensory conversation is again something that um, a lot of us are trying to understand how to broach that topic, how to have better conversations. But like I said, I think it starts with using the kind of terminologies, the kind of language which are more appropriate, which normalize that conversation. So it's more about talking about it in a way which doesn't put the blame on the person who is struggling, um, especially when it comes to suicide. So don't talk about suicide in a way which maybe romanticizes it, glamorizes it, or a lot of times I think someone else was also talking about how media sensationalizes suicide, especially in recent times, and that sort of leads to suicide contagion, copycat suicides, and other people struggling with their mental health, and they do not get the help that they deserve. So stop romanticizing it, stop sensationalizing it, have a better approach in terms of not blaming the person who's struggling, not using terms like committed suicide or successful suicide. Instead, talking about other aspects of it, raising awareness about the warning signs of suicide, raising awareness about the help that is available. A lot of times, even when there's talk about suicide on the news, I think it's better that we put in some resources at the bottom. For example, maybe a helpline number can be flashed at the bottom of the screen. At the bottom, we have a slide, so maybe we can have a helpline number that can be flashed there. So those are some ways that we can tackle this in a better way. We can talk about suicide in a better light, and yeah, I think the most basic thing is that just be more empathetic, be more compassionate, be kinder when you're talking about it. Don't don't make it look like it's a negative thing, right? Like, if someone comes up and tells you that they're thinking about suicide or they're having suicidal thoughts, don't make them feel like there's something fundamentally wrong with them, because that's not the case. It can happen to anyone and everyone, and it's completely okay to feel this way. It's okay to not be okay. I think that's the message that we want to send out. So yeah, that's how maybe we can shift perspectives and shift the conversation.
Thank you, Rashi. The next question is for Mr. Nivendra. How do you support people after they have attempted suicide so that they don't feel alone? I guess everyone could answer that. Nivendra, are you here?
He's there in the meeting.
Yeah.
Maybe you should repeat the question. Maybe he didn't hear you, Maria.
Yeah. I was just asking, sir, how do you support somebody after they have attempted suicide so as to not make them feel alone?
Miss Marian, I lost you there a little bit. Could you repeat the question, please? The connection went a little off.
Sure. No problem.
Thank you.
The question was, how do you support people after they have attempted suicide so that they don't feel alone?
Okay. I think that's a very crucial and important question, because as much as we raise awareness and talk about prevention, I think one group that often gets left behind are survivors of attempts, right? Because it's heavily stigmatized as well. And right, so if you know someone who, the first thing you need to know is, if you know someone who has attempted suicide and survived that attempt, there's always a risk of them attempting again. Okay, that's something we know, and that's something you need to be mindful of when you are, if you are supporting someone who has attempted suicide, because the risk can be greater, right? Okay, so I think, like Rashi also said, it's about us letting them know that we're not judging them, right? That we are not there to preach morality when it comes to an attempt survivor, to tell them what they've done is right or wrong, good or bad. That's not what they're here for, what we are there for. But what we are there for is to show them empathy and acceptance, right? It's about meeting that person where they are, rather than us being on a different plane or a more higher ground and saying, you shouldn't have done that, what were you thinking, without saying things like that, to get down to that person's level and empathize. Because again, as much as listening is important, like Janaki also very rightly said, hope is important, because that's the theme for this year's World Suicide Prevention Day, creating hope through action. So action wise, what we can do is to make sure they have continued support by a mental health professional as well as family and friends. I think both of those things become really important, right? Because an attempt in itself can be quite traumatic. And I think in the health systems that we have in India and Sri Lanka as well, I know that sometimes attempt survivors don't get the best of treatment in our healthcare system. There's a lot of stigma and discrimination related to that. And we see that, I've seen that with my own eyes in hospitals where people are not given painkiller medication. They're not given a bed because, you wanted to kill yourself, so why do you want a bed? And that I have seen nurses actually ask that question from people. So what I'm trying to say here is that we need to get out of that mindset and see them as people first before we talk about what they did or didn't do, right? And another thing is to always let them know that they can talk to you, right? So automatically some of the responses that we tend to give is, don't do that again, next time don't do stupid stuff, talk to someone, but without saying, because those things can be sometimes hurtful, but to say, I'm there if you want to talk to me, and to regularly check on that person. So when it comes to checking in on someone, I think we have to go beyond just asking someone, how are you? Because the conditioned response to that is most often, I'm fine. And it's a very natural conditioned response that a lot of us have because we've been conditioned that way. But I think asking questions like, how are you feeling today? Was there anything difficult in your day today? Or what are your plans for tomorrow? Right? I think that's a brilliant question to ask, because that really gives you a lot of information. What are your plans for tomorrow? Or how are you feeling? So I think by asking questions that go a little deeper than just saying, how are you? And asking, how are you really doing? Are you really okay? Those kinds of questions, I think, can make a huge difference. Yeah. So those are some things I wanted to share, Marianne.
Thank you. I think those were a lot of very practical suggestions. I think whoever asked that question got a lot of things to think about. So thank you so much, sir. The next question is a general question for everyone. How exactly will we find, how can friends support suicide attempt survivors, especially when everyone is traumatized and they don't have anyone else to go to, including a guide or any friends? How can they overcome their problems?
See, this is a very good and very practical question, because at this young adults, because they are at the most risk, I mean, if you look at the statistics that you started with, in fact, and this is the fourth largest statistics all over the world, and in India, it is the second, right? So not everybody has access to therapy, and in India, therapy itself is stigmatized. For them to find a therapist and then stay with them for at least 6 months so that the CBT works or DBT works or something works on them, it requires money, effort, energy. I do not know where it is available, easily available for them to access. So what can friends do? That is the question. And a part of it has already been answered by Rashi. She said that, everyone can be a QPR gatekeeper. Everyone can do this. I think I did this. It's a very easy course. Anybody can do it, and it's very easy to get that certification, and it gives you immediate tools to handle, right? But if you want to take it to the second layer and ask the question, what do I do after that? Believe me, there's only so much you can do. If your friend is contemplating suicide or they are suicidal, the best thing you can do is to hand them over. Ask them the right questions and hand them over to a professional. Do not take it on yourself. You yourself are also a young adult or whatever, at that age, to think that you have to now provide the psychological care that the person needs, and be a support system, is taking on too much pressure, according to me. I don't know what the other panelists think. I think that they should be referred to a safe adult, maybe their parents, or if they don't want to talk to your parents, then somebody else's parents. So I had a case where the girl was absolutely stuck. I don't want to tell my mother about it, because she had gone through an abortion and she was suicidal after that, and the friend brought her to talk to me. So we figured out that the friend's mother was a safe person for her to talk to. So there are always options. Pain is real, so is hope. That is my point, that we have to figure out, but you don't have to do this alone on your own, is my message to all the young people who are here, that do not think that you can give the support that even professionals have to struggle with, because the other person has to be ready, right? So I think finding a safe adult is a good, and refer them to somebody who can take on from there, someone with more resources than students.
Yes, I think that's very true. And also when we talk about safe people, it's also somebody who can come to our aid quickly. I think that also needs to be emphasized. It can't be somebody who, will not be able to come and help us. Then they don't become a safe person, even if we feel emotionally close to them.
Yes.
Physical accessibility as well. Yeah, but I agree with you a lot, ma'am. Any of the other panelists want to share anything on this question?
Yeah, I just want to say I agree with what Jonaki said, that even though you are a gatekeeper or a first responder, doesn't mean you're a professional counselor or a psychologist or whatever you want to call yourself. And I think it's really important that we don't bear that burden alone, and we don't promise secrecy to a person who talks to us about suicidal thoughts. I think that's a really important one, because a lot of people say you need to promise you won't tell anyone so that I can tell you, but you need to somehow navigate that conversation.
Sir, I think you muted.
Yeah, sorry, someone. Yeah, just not promise them confidentiality, but make sure that you share that with someone, like Jonaki said, you can trust, or that person trusts. So for example, if it's college and if you know that someone is at risk or is thinking about suicide or is having another mental health concern, and if you think they're in danger to themselves, I think perhaps you can inform someone in the faculty. And sometimes we don't have to, taking consent from that person is always a good thing, but sometimes we can't take consent because that person's life can be at risk. So you need to sort of do what you got to do. And sometimes you might feel that your friend might get angry with you or might not trust you again, but at least you're keeping that person alive, right? So that's what I want to say.
Rashi, do you want to say anything?
No, I think Jonki and Nivedra, they summed it up pretty well, because I think just reaching out, making sure that you're there for that person can make a whole lot of difference. So yeah, I think summed it up pretty well.
So we'll take one last final question. There are still questions coming in. Maybe we can share the email address if all the panelists are okay. So the students can get in touch with you guys. The last question is about multiple suicide attempts. I'm paraphrasing because it's a long question, but essentially about multiple suicide attempts being seen as, the person is not even trying to help themselves, and how we can help navigate those conversations.
Sorry, I'm going to take this one because this is something that I am currently also dealing with one person. And the thing is that if someone has, like I said right in the beginning of my talk, that anybody who has gone through a suicide attempt, 90% of the cases, they have some mental health issue. Right? There is an underlying mental health issue. So this is not just suicide. This is about depression. This is about anxiety. This is about maybe some OCD, some personality disorder, that only a technical and a professional, trained professional. Even a psychologist alone will not happen. They need a team where, with a psychiatrist, someone who has the difference between psychologists and psychiatrists. Psychiatrists are the people who have gone through this whole MBBS doctor and they have specialized in mental health, right? They're ready to write prescriptions for you. Psychologists will do counseling and treatment and clinical assessments, but they cannot write medications for you, right? So this is the difference. So this, you require a team. To deal with multiple suicide attempts, you require a team of professionals. Not only just, even a psychologist alone cannot handle this, believe me. So if you know of anyone like this, you can, I suggest that not to even wait for the national helpline. You may want to take them to, in Bangalore, you can take them to St. John's Hospital. Okay, and because that is one of the hospital which provides a lot of, they have a whole department that I know of, and they also have a social works department, so you can figure out other financials if required or whatever. But they have a team who's available to handle this kind of crisis. So doing this alone is a bad idea. Number one, because there are multiple, this is a layered issue. Okay, so you require a team. So if your friend is not ready, or if you know someone who's not ready, then you act like a conduit, like Navendra was saying, that you become that space in between the problem and the solution. So you stay and you pester them and you talk to them and do what it takes and take them to a professional, or gather around a whole round of friends, tell that bombard them with messages, prime a group that no, you have to go. Because people do it. People do it for smaller reasons. If one person is not coming to a party, there'll be 10 people calling you up and saying, no, you have to come. So if one person is thinking of this, please gather 20 people and tell them, no, you have to go, and go with the person. Go. Once you have taken them to professional, your problem is solved to a large degree. I mean, then, you have done all that you could have, right? Hand it over, refer it to the professionals, people. I don't know if I made sense, but.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think I really love the word pestering. So keep pestering and be annoying, because be annoying people. Sometimes you're afraid that we'll be annoying. We keep asking, but be annoying, keep asking, pester them as much as you can, and even just take them. And sometimes, it just helps to dial the number on your phone and give it to them if you need them to talk to someone, like a crisis line or something. Yeah, so just don't be afraid to be annoying as a friend.
Yes, I think if I can rephrase that, it's asking for help, or rather helping people by referring them to seek help from someone who can help them. That was a lot of help, but I completely agree with both of you. Due to lack of time, we'll be closing the floor for questions, but is there anything that the panelists want to say as closing statements?
I have nothing to say. I think this was very well conducted and we've said all that we could. And if anyone needs to reach out, please do not be locked in silence and, be pester, be annoying. It doesn't matter. In this case, it really doesn't matter. Life is more important.
Yeah, I just want to ask a simple question before we close. How many? Can someone tell me, not the organizers or not the panelists, but other people in this webinar, can you tell me what the ambulance number is in Bangalore? Does anyone know? Yeah, don't answer. Yeah, just put it on the chat. Yeah. Put it on the chat. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so we have a lot of 108s. Brilliant. Yes, I remember the number too. Thank you. Superb. Okay, now I'm going to ask you, how many of you guys remember the number of the helpline in Bangalore that is 24 hours available, off the top of your head? Right. Yeah. So most of the time when I ask this question, a lot of people find it difficult to sort of quickly pick it up because we don't really interact with that much. No. So what I want to say is, if we treat the body with this sense of urgency of knowing this number, having it at the tip of our fingers, being able to dial it in an emergency, let's treat our brain health the same way, right? So let's have the information that we need as gatekeepers to refer people, also easily accessible and not having to sort of Google things all the time, but just knowing where to go. Like, for example, St. John's or Nimhans or wherever there's help available. Just to know these little things, I think would be helpful. So that's what I really want to say as a closing remark. Thank you.
Any final suggestions or anything? I know I'm pushing it, but any final suggestions or something you want to tell the students before we close?
No, I don't have any. I'm okay. Right?
I've said all that I wanted to, because I believe that everyone needs to believe in the sacredness of life. Nature has worked very hard for it, and we do all we can to preserve it.
Yes, thank you so much. Sorry, also you want to say anything? Okay. Yeah, so then we'll conclude. I think this was a very fruitful session. It was very enriching for all of us involved. I think we covered a lot of things, from myths relating to suicide, myths relating to how to relate to other people who are contemplating suicide or who have attempted suicide. Also, I also liked that, in a sense, we followed kind of the biopsychosocial model, because Jonaki ma'am spoke a lot about the brain and moving from survival mode to a mode of flourishing in a more biological perspective. Rashi was talking about the experiential aspects, the guilt, the shame, which I think Jonaki ma'am also spoke about. And Nivendra sir was talking a lot about the social and community related aspects, including our religious, our social beliefs, the role of media, etc. So I think it was a very comprehensive way of looking at suicide. And I also liked that we looked at it both from a macro and micro perspective, and seeing suicide as a public health problem. Since public health is my area, I get excited when people talk about it as a public health problem. It definitely is. And if I could just summarize, maybe the running theme here is the importance of talking, the importance of listening, and the importance of seeking help, not just for others, but also for yourself. So I think there were a lot of practical suggestions. There was also a lot of contextualizing, and I think it was a very comprehensive and very fruitful 2 hours. So thank you to all our panelists. I think Rashi has left. Before we allow you to leave, I request our HOD, Dr. Rekha from the Department of Psychology, St. Joseph's Evening College, to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you, Ms. Marianne. So we've come to the end of a very fruitful and meaningful program that we had today. And it wouldn't have been possible, and I cannot move ahead without thanking our panelists first. So I really want to extend our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of the management and staff and students of St. Joseph's Evening College to our wonderful panelists for today, Ms. Jonaki, Ms. Rashi, and Mr. Nivendra. Thank you so much for taking your time out. And even though we planned this program at a very short notice, you all were so kind enough to accommodate our request and also make time with your inputs, with your experiences, and very valuable insights that you shared with us today. So thank you all very much. We look forward to continue this association with you. We are also very thankful to our principal, Dr. Paul Newman, who has always been a strong pillar of support and encouragement to us for any of our department initiatives, any of the other association or college events that we do. He's always there. Even today, he spent 2 hours of his time despite having so many other things put on hold. So thank you so much, sir. And the introduction and your welcome, the comments that you made were so useful for us to set the stage for today's program. So we're really indeed grateful to you and also very privileged to have you as our principal. Thank you. And we are also thankful to the management, the technical team, Father Brian Pereira, SJ. He is our rector, the director of the college, as well as the vice president of the Bangalore Jesuit Education Society. They've been extremely open to the idea of having many conversations on mental health. And this is just one initiative that they have been actively involved at the planning stage and even the execution. So we are very happy to have that kind of support. I wouldn't want to miss Miss Marianne. She's been an extremely supportive and helpful enthusiastic member in the department, and I think most of the planning and most of the execution today was done by her. Brilliant moderation. Thank you so much. I also want to thank all our students and the active participation that you all showed through the questions, through your interaction, through responding to some of the questions posed by the panelists. And I think for us, the success of this event is really in the way the interaction shaped up, with the kind of involvement from the group at a time when maybe everybody is tired at the end of the day's work. Or I think it really showed their interest. This may be just a small attempt on our end to address an issue that's much larger, but we hope that it was not just one of those events that people do to commemorate a certain day, or just to observe something for the sake of doing it. But I'm sure a program like this has really opened up dialogue, conversations, made people think, and a lot of the perspectives, the tips, the simple things that you shared, I'm sure has made a difference in one way or the other. So we're really happy. And I'm sorry if I've missed out anybody missed out anyone when I'm acknowledging their support. We also want to thank our student volunteers and representatives from Mandala, our psychology association, particularly Mr. Ebin Matthew and Ms. Pratiksha Chetri. They have been also very actively involved in making the poster, getting things done, getting people together. So your contribution matters a lot too. So on that note, I think we will end on time with a very grateful heart, and hoping that we can interact in more ways and bring about some change within our small abilities. Thank you so much.